Nope.
No, I'm going to stick with it. First principles. Actually, that's totally precedent.
Yeah.
So this topic comes up a lot. First principle thinking, but we're going to be contrasting that with precedent and conditioning. So we're all given a precedent, and that precedent is whatever we experience when we're born, first like formative years of one's life. So this would I'd say that there's a huge influence from parents, siblings, family, and then increasingly, further and further out. So friends, community, country, world. What are you watching? Who are you around? The examples that you're given, that's all precedent thinking.
Mhm.
But then we learn over time, usually from emotions. And one could even say that it's always emotions, but that we try to sometimes apply some logical thinking
Yeah.
from the prefrontal cortex, But the idea there is that through different experiences, you experience, pain, joy. There's a much larger weight on pain, just because of the way that human beings evolved. And I'd say just like mammals or living things that have emotions generally.
Mhm.
And so when you experience something, if it makes you feel good, then you might tweak your precedent in terms of how you spend your time, how you make decisions, towards those actions that, uh, at least in the past, were moving you away from pain and towards more happiness. But that conditioning is not necessarily, guided by anything fundamental. It's just reaction. So, for example, you eat a cookie and it's like, oh, this tastes good. Oh, it makes me feel good. Oh, I'm going to eat more cookies. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that'll get you to a certain local plateau of happiness, right? But it's not probably like the mountain of how high one could get in terms of happiness because, of course, there's all these negative side effects associated with like eating too much junk food, for example, right? So then comes first principle thinking, which starts with understanding the rules that govern a system. And so for relationships, for example, I would say that Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. For effectiveness, which I actually has a lot to do with relationships, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People would be a good one. For understanding meaning, direction, and purpose in a generalized way that doesn't require like making a lot of assumptions, but just basic understanding of the human condition. You could look at like the Peaceful Warrior and some of the lessons there as first principles. They define a system, and then you have to know what you want within that system, right? So two people can have the same understanding of what drives a system. So that system could be the system of human relationships or communities. That could be the economic system and how we create value, right? We could use that as an example. So if you understand the value creation process within human systems, then that would be a very useful set of first principles to guide investing strategy. But you still may not invest in the exact same securities. You have to know what you want. So you may be an investor that prefers spending less time doing research, and you just want to, have a buy and hold strategy you don't have to worry about. You may still have fundamentally a similar set of principles that you use for understanding value creation, right? Oh, it's solving problems, right? Goods and services that are useful to people. And then if they can make them at less money than it costs to sell them, then they're going to be more profitable, and those are better businesses. Like you can have a very simple set of first principles to understand how the economy works and how value is created, but you may still invest differently because of who you are and your own personal preferences, right? So you need both for first principle thinking. You need to understand how a system works, then you also need to know who you are and what you want, so that you can then operate within that system. But notice how that's like a very bottoms up. I'm going to start with a set of mental models, first principles. I'm using those interchangeably
Mhm.
to try to understand how the world works, and then knowing yourself and what you want in a way such that you can navigate that world. It's like having the right map to the
Yeah.
territory.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday between Lex Friedman and Tim Urban, and Tim Urban is the same guy who did I think it's like Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator TED Talk. That
Ah,
guy.
yeah.
Yeah, and then Lex Friedman asked the question like, what do you think makes Elon Musk so successful? You know, and just like and just like out of all the things that like makes him different from other people. And then he said he thought it was that he was like rational in the way that most humans are crazy, which is where he kind of just looks at the first principles. And the even though like the precedent, he was talking about like in caveman days, the precedent was very important. Like if there people were just like, oh, you need to put a spear on a spearhead this way, or like you shouldn't eat that mushroom, and then it's just like and then it's just like
What
if you
about the
think
risk takers and the
yeah
entrepreneurs?
if
I will
you
eat that mushroom, and
if
then they
you think
die.
yeah
And then it's like,
exactly, so it's like if
oops.
you think that you're smarter than that, then you're just not really smarter than that. It's that accumulation of wisdom from all these generations. And then he's talking about like basically in a world where like let's say there's a bucket, and then like the precedent thinking and wisdom is like a water drip going in that bucket, and then it's like maybe for like thousands of years that bucket wasn't moving very much because there wasn't much change, and so then all the wisdom could accumulate, right? But then if the bucket's moving a whole lot, then that just isn't really helpful. And so
That was
yeah.
deep.
Yeah.
One of the other things about precedent versus first principle thinking that I think is quite interesting. On the surface of it, people think of examples as being simpler,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that first principles are complicated because it sounds fancy and theoretical, right? But it's actually not.
Yeah,
So,
well, here's the thing is like with first principles, if you talk about the rules like governing a system, you also, sometimes it's a very specific system that you're trying to work within. Maybe that's like a company, for example, and then you're trying to like think of the first principles of how am I gonna, succeed within this company or something. That's kind of like a more specific version of first principles where you're figuring out the rules that govern the system in a very specific environment. But then there's also more generalized first principles that like, and when you're talking about the rules that govern a system, it's like the rules that govern happiness or contentment or things like that are a lot more generalized. And then I think the thing with that, and also with both specific environments and these generalized first principles, is that they can be applied in a lot of different areas. When you think about an example, you're restricted to the kind of environment that example was in. It's like if somebody does this in this company, and it's like, okay, well, based on this example, it isn't really helpful for me if I move to a different company. If all you're doing is you're just basing it off of that example. But if you're thinking about the rules that govern the system, then you can also see the rules and patterns within different structures and different systems, and then you can apply those more generally. So it's not only for just specific environments, which I think is a lot more useful.
yeah. Well, it's the generalizability
Yeah.
of not just first. I mean, you could say first principles. I think that principles.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just say principles.
Yeah.
Nobody ever really talks about the second or third.
Yeah.
So that can get
The
confusing.
18th principle.
The 18th principle.
Yeah.
First principles, I think it really means like the most fundamental.
Mhm.
But it's actually quite simple. So, for example, with relationships, like if you were to just try to think of like what are the bare bones first principles
That's
of
funny
better
because it's
relationships.
actually that what Tim Urban was saying in the podcast is that like relationships is one of those things that doesn't change that much.
No.
With like, which is why precedent, listening to your grandma about how to build relationships is actually going to be, pretty useful, because it's like, well, relationships, how you build relationships with people, that's something that doesn't really change all that much. So the accumulation of wisdom and knowledge can be, is very useful in that sense. But then it's like technology, not so much.
Yeah,
But,
that's right.
Yeah.
I haven't asked Granny recently about technology.
Yeah.
I should call her. But not to talk about technology.
Yeah.
Tell her stories about the noodles that she used to make, how delicious they were. Yeah. Yum. First principles noodles. Okay, so but seriously, let's think about like just the first principles of relationships, just to give folks like an example of what this means.
Right.
And then compare that to examples and precedent thinking.
Sure.
What would you say are like 3 principles of relationships? Governing a system, like what causes a relationship to be better, more useful, and
Appreciation of the other person, shared interests, and that might be it. I mean, for like the very, very, very
the
basic.
very best. Yeah. So if I were to think of like just getting along with people at the most basic level,
Right.
it's the universal principles that we
Yeah.
came up with for coming into WEquil group.
Kindness, freedom, service.
Kindness, freedom, service.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you need those.
Yeah.
I might call those first principles of relationships. But then you might have like, now I'm totally making this up now, but second level might be like, okay, for this particular kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Like with kids. Right? So then I would
I
say
think
like
there's it's
parenting
I
or-
think it's mostly I think it's just first principles, but within more specific structures
yeah,
in
I
game.
know.
But that's cool terminology.
Yeah.
honestly.
I was thinking like,
Yeah.
because it's almost like what's the
A widget tree. Of
exactly.
first principles.
Yeah, that's exactly. I was gonna say that this is a child of a child of a child.
Yeah.
This is the second child, third child. Like this is
Waja.
like that's a reference to a guy who does a Flutter video. I'm gonna
It's
take
a
this
really
moment.
good
If you know
Flutter
that,
video.
if you're out there and you're watching
And
this
you
and
got
you're
that
into
reference.
Flutter, we are hiring Flutter developers left and right.
Yeah.
So
Especially if you got that reference.
especially
That's really cool.
In fact, if you come in to our Discord and you write widget as soon as you join the developers, if you write widget on our Discord and you're one of the new Flutter developers, then we're going to reach out to you directly and say hi. And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's cool.
that's a fast track to getting our attention. Why jive? Oh man. Anyway, yeah, it's one of the most watched Flutter videos. Anyway, so back to first principles. Well, there's so that would be like one set of principles. Another set of first principles might be for value creation in human systems. So how much value it is depends on how cheaply the solution can scale. The potential market size, and how wide, or actually it's how much value capture a company gets depends on the profit margin. But a lot of industries provide tremendous value; they just don't make a lot of money, like the airlines. So they have and also making cars. So that's why the
Yeah.
multiples on airlines and cars are so low. Is that like this business, they have to like sell tons of product. The revenue is extremely high, but their profit margins are itty bitty little things, right? So the value capture there is very low. But even that's a first principle of understanding investing, is understanding value capture. Value capture would be one of these first principles. Another one might be capital cycles, like understanding that within certain industries, that there are periods of higher investment and lower investment, and that drives cycles in supply, and that drives cycles in prices, and we're seeing that with a lot of commodities. So that would be just another example the fact that you can create technology by research and development. That was a new thing that people just didn't know about 300 years ago. There wasn't like this, we should invest in research and development so that we can, basically out tech our opponents, or, like that just wasn't a way that people thought. It
Yeah.
was because technological change was so slow that folks weren't even aware of the first principle of maybe we should try to think of ways to do things better. So the precedent of first principle thinking. So now more people are talking about first principle thinking, and they're like, oh yeah, ask why, innovate, let's try to make the world better. We can rethink the future, and it's like, okay, well, one reason why they're doing that is still precedent thinking, but they're just spending all their time looking at the example of Elon Musk.
Right, yeah.
Elon Musk is
the
a first
precedent
principle
is-
thinker.
The precedent is first principle thinking, I guess.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll go up and I'll ask, like, I'll talk. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'll talk to them about these concepts, and I'll ask them, like, what does first principle thinking mean to you? And I'll have to add the to you, because if I don't add that, then they feel silly.
Right, yeah.
Because usually they'll be talking about it a lot, and then I'll ask them to define it, and they're like,
The first principle thing.
Elon Musk.
Like the principle, and it's the first one.
Elon Musk
Yeah.
does it, and Steve Jobs does it, Bill Gates does it, other people, first principles. It's the principle that comes first. That's what it is. It's like, no, you did not give me a definition.
Yeah.
And when the first examples, when you ask folks what first principle thinking means, and they start to give you examples of people that do first principle thinking, that's precedent.
Yeah. And that's not first principle.
It's very useful, though.
Yeah.
Watching Elon Musk, you're giving yourself a great precedent. And when Elon Musk makes you happy because he buys 9.2% of Twitter and you owned a lot of it, then that makes you want to talk about him even more and watch his shows even more, and just,
Watch those motivational clip videos
Oh, yeah.
where they like take Elon Musk, they like add in some inspirational music, and then some like stock videos of someone typing
yeah.
and walking on a beach.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Jonah.
You mean Andrew?
Andrew. Sorry, one of our students is so cool. He comes up with like the most amazing stories, and then when he's excited or bored on Zoom, he does the same thing. It's the same emotional response.
Yeah.
And it's this. It's so great. All right. Anyway, WEquil School. That was a plug. That was a WEquil School plug. All
Right, yeah. That was a great plug.
Yeah.
So relevant.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So then first principle thinking became precedent with probably Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs started to really change. He was just an iconic figure.
Right.
And then Paul Graham made first principles of startups a precedent. He set the precedent for first principles in software startups.
Yeah, the problem with kind of thinking like, oh, first principles as a precedent is that as the world changes, the principles have to change as well. I mean, because the environment that the rules and of the game, well, sometimes the game changes. More so in some areas than others.
Ooh, first principles of first principles. That will help. Because there's the regime change.
Right,
The
yeah.
first principles of first principles. Okay, so we'll talk about that after I want to hit on how
Yeah.
complicated precedent is compared to first principles, because I mentioned that earlier, right?
Right, mhm.
I'm arguing that first principle thinking is actually easier if you have enough precedent. And by enough precedent, I mean enough examples. By examples, I mean enough data. So once you have enough data,
Then you can actually structure a good set of first principles.
right, which
Yeah.
I also call mental models.
Yeah.
Because, so mental models are part of, you need the mental model in order for you to understand how the structure
Well,
of a
because
system works.
it's also with precedent. I think precedent and first principles can have the same flaw if you don't have enough data. Because it's like if you are basing first principles, you are restricted to the data that you have because you can't base first principles off of something that you don't know about. And so if if your experience is very restricted to a certain environment and you're structuring a set of mental models or first principles for that environment, it'd be like, oh, this is a great set of first principles. It works in all these areas that in this environment that I'm always in. And then you go somewhere new, you change your job, you change where you live, or any of those things, and it's like completely different, and those sets of first principles and mental models just collapse in this different environment where those rules just don't work. And so I think that is also important.
All that learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Generalizable knowledge that's so important.
Yeah.
That actually gets to first principles too. But anyway, so yeah, thank you for that point. I love that. So if we're looking at going from precedent to first principles, using relationships as an example. So the precedent thinking would say, okay, I am going to learn by example, aka learn from all the data that I have on relationships with people. But then also, those examples, I'm going to iterate, and I'm going to iterate my interpretation of them. How do I interpret the example of that relationship? That changes over time with conditioning.
Yeah.
Right? So you get an emotional response to that. Babies just do what they see.
Yeah.
Right? There's not really, and they're definitely being conditioned along the way, right? Like, oh wow, ice cream. You know.
Oh, smeared on my face.
Yeah, I love it, ice cream. You know, and so then it's like ice cream good.
Yeah.
Then they see the box. Or they just hear the parents say ice cream, right?
Yeah.
So that's the conditioning right?
Yeah.
And then, so you have all these examples, right? With relationships, you might have had, like, let's say somebody has a string of, like, they date a bunch of people, and, like, it's just, like, over and over and over again, they just get burned. Like, for whatever reason, they're just, like, really sad. They're playing sad love songs all the time. It's just like, all I wanna do is be alone. Nobody loves me but my mommy. Oh, you know, and you're just like,
that's an actual song, by the way.
Oh, it is now.
Yeah.
Nobody
it's on
loves
YouTube.
me but my mommy. Oh, you know, right? And you're sitting there in your room.
It's called My Mommy.
That song is called Nobody Loves Me But My Mommy.
Yeah. It's a great song.
It's now available on WEquil.app.
Yeah.
And on YouTube.
Yeah.
As of now.
Yeah.
WEquil.app later. Because we'll put it there.
Yeah.
Featured. Okay. So what does that mean? Like, what's going to happen? So you're trying to, here's the way that first principles would help one in that situation. Okay. If you keep making the same decision about who you're going to date, for example, and it just keeps not working out, then maybe there's something about the system of trying to build a romantic relationship that you're completely missing. Right? Maybe you don't base it on they like the same video games that you do. Like, there's certain decisions that people might make that are not based on first principle thinking.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, well, this music makes me feel good. You don't like Nobody Loves Me But My Mommy? Like, then that's an issue. Maybe we're not going to get along. It's like, okay, that's not, maybe there's other things that matter more.
I mean, that song is just so good.
It's iconic. That one is.
Yeah.
That's like not liking Star Wars. Like, I
Yeah.
don't trust people that don't like Star Wars. I'm like, okay, so what's another, like, I feel like that's useful. Examples are useful because you can generalize it so much easier. You have how many relationships do you think the average person has had cumulative by the time they're 21? Take a wild guess.
Like 300?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe even more, because it's like every single grade.
Oh, yeah.
You know, all the neighbors. What if you moved?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot, right? So you've got all these examples, but are you just going to be able to pull from your mind?
It also depends on, like, they exist or, like, you've talked to them.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Like, are you talking about like deep relationships? Or
Yeah,
yeah. Well, I'd say just like interactions, meaningful, repeated at least 10 times or something. I don't know. But the point is that there's a lot.
yeah.
Whereas the number of principles in Dale Carnegie's, How to Win Friends, Influence People, plus like, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, like these are books that are attempting to put like principles around human behavior and a lot of like happiness and success is derived from
Also,
relationships.
yeah, and the examples are going to be for very specific situations that have like
Oh, totally.
details with like that person, and then there's like other people that are different, and then the example is just like really hard to try to figure out what it all means.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think like just I think that that's the same with like so many other things too, because it's just because there's so many changes, even if they're just subtle changes in environment that can come out with a different outcome, which is then just like data because you're there, you experience it. And so if that is also giving you some sort of emotional response, then through conditioning that can kind of warp your thinking if you're not careful. And then if you don't really understand the root cause of it, then if you kind of base a lot of your thinking off of precedent, it can be really hard to like backtrack and work through like what are all the things that happened that are specific to different environments and in different situations that I was in that had constructed my thinking in this certain way. And it's just because you experience so much and you don't really know like how it's affecting you a lot of the time. You can't really see how much it's influencing your behavior. That can be really hard to work through and kind of backtrack and be like, why am I doing things this certain way? Because there's so much precedent that went into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love, yeah, that was awesome. Yeah. So
Thank you.
all those examples, it's so hard. It's like, so, for example, somebody leaves a company, right? Somebody comes, they work, then they leave. And then you want to try to make sense of, okay, so what was, like doing post-mortems are very valuable. Same thing for investing. You make an investment, whether or not it goes up, down, whether or not you made money, lost money, sideways, right? Maybe you went, maybe it was going up, and then all of a sudden you went back in time.
Oh my gosh. I
you're
remember
like,
that
"Whoa!"
someone made that chart when they were like,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
gonna go back
Oh.
in time. Was that
That was
Bitcoin or
Bitcoin.
Tesla?
That
Oh
was
yeah,
Bitcoin.
that was
That
so
was
hilarious.
so cool.
It was basically the
Bitcoin
chart
is
for
going to bend time. That was so
Yeah.
great. That was the peak right there. It was like,
Yeah.
"Oh." Everybody had rocket moons like glowing out of their eyeballs at the
Yeah.
at the end of 2017. And that's why we sold.
We didn't think it was gonna bend time.
It was like, it was either going to bend time or crash. And it was like,
Yeah. Which one is more likely?
first principles of decision making. So that idea of Occam's razor is a
Oh,
first
yeah.
principle of decision making.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not a first principle of
It's
decision
a
making.
strategy.
It's a strategy.
Yeah.
It's a strategy. Yeah.
Isn't it kind of a strategy based off of first
It's a
principles,
strategy
though?
based on first principles.
Yeah.
But that requires, so there's first principles, but first principles don't tell you what you want.
Right. They just tell you the rules.
Yeah. So like, I'd say that I have a very strong precedent or sorry, preference for what kinds of relationships I find to be most meaningful.
One thing is, I don't think there's only just mental models that are first principles, but also mental models that allow you to take those first principles and implement them in your decision making and behavior. Because there's like, okay, I have these rules that govern a system, but then it could be that you decide to apply those rules in a way that's kind of like more precedent focused, or you can apply them with certain mental models. So it's like, okay, let's say I know about the first principles of relationships, where it's like, okay, I want to be nice to people. Then it's like, okay, well then how do I want to interpret that and integrate it into my behavior, because there's also going to be exceptions to the rule. That's one thing Jordan Peterson talks about, because he obviously, like, his book is called 12 Rules for Life, and then he's like, okay, well, some people will be like, well, what about this situation? It's like, well, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, and places where it doesn't actually apply. And so I think that there's also kind of like two layers of mental models.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Great question from Dr. McPhail. She's always so helpful at driving our discussions. So she was asking how to practice first principle thinking. So I think that when should you apply first principle thinking? Yeah. I think that you should apply first principle So first of all, let's get to first principles of first principles.
Yeah.
That's what you're actually asking about. You're asking about first principles of first principles. We call these zero principles. Sorry.
What?
First, second, but if you go back, then it's like. No, I don't
And we
know
call
the word.
them base principles.
Base principles. Yeah, you're right. Base. Yeah. All right. Actually, no. You should say first principles. First principles of first principles. Just takes too long to say. We'll have to come up with a new word.
Principles of first principles.
Maybe those are the anyway, we'll figure it out. First principles of first principles. Okay. So one of them, I think, is that in order, you have to actually test principles.
Yeah.
So you have to be making forecasts or decisions. A decision is basically a forecast. Every single moment of your life, you're making a decision. Right? I made a decision to join Sume on this discussion. She's like, hey, this would be cool. Maybe we should discuss this on the TV show. And I was saying yes. Okay, yeah, let's do it. Why? Why did I decide to do that? Right? We're all constantly making decisions. And those decisions are based on two things. One, our map of the territory. Right? How are we navigating all and interpreting all the different options that are in front of us, right?
An opportunity cost.
And what do we want, right? So you think of a utility
Which I guess
function.
what do you want influences the opportunity, at
Yes.
least perceived opportunity
Yeah,
cost.
you have a utility function, right? It's saying, okay, this makes me, happier, more contented, brings me success. However you're measuring what it is that you want out of life.
Yeah.
You need to know what that is if you want to practice first principles thinking. It's a mental model. But
Yeah.
that model requires both understanding of the world and understanding of oneself and what one wants. You need both those things. And if you don't have those things, you're not doing first principle thinking. So like a dog that sees a squirrel is not thinking, at this moment in time, what would bring me the most joy over the course of my entire life, not just in the moment right now. I think chasing after that tire on that car would do it for me. Out of all the possible options, there's a squirrel.
There's
I could
the
go.
tire.
I could
There's
go.
that guy's hamburger.
I could pee on that tree.
Yeah.
I could sniff that dog's butt.
I could pee on that bush.
But I've decided that in this moment, the single most highest thing I can do with my time is chase after that car's tire.
Yeah.
And then when I finally get to it, maybe it stopped at a stop sign, I realize that there is no meaning to life. No, I'm just kidding. So the point is, so you have to make a decision, right? And so you have to know what drives outcomes. You have to be able to make reasonable forecasts about what's going to help you achieve your goals, but then you also have to know what your goals are. The problem with like precedent thinking, if you don't apply first principles and you don't think that way, is that you can spend your whole life just going through the motions and like living out like Flutter app scripts.
Like, this is how I'm supposed to live a good life, and just
This
like,
is what I do. I do what my parents said. Then I go and do what community tell me to do. Then I get old. Then I go, why did I not do what I wanted to do?
ah.
Yeah. So it's so much it's easier mentally to go through and just do precedent thinking, but because there's all these examples, if you don't go through the process of synthesizing, structure your thinking around, this gets back to also how to practice first principles. Right. Right. When you have experiences, when you're learning something, if you want to process a challenge, like, so we've had some departures recently. Like, one of the things that we're encouraging folks to do is to like do a post-mortem for yourself. Like, think, well, so we're a learning community, so we don't actually have like departures per se. Folks might just move around or decide to move in and out, and so we actually have we have some folks coming in and out all the time. But the mostly in. Where are we at on the app now? This is like
In terms of users?
yeah, it seems like we're getting a lot more folks on the app.
Lots more folks on the app Discord.
Oh, both.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're at like 56.
Oh, cool. Well, anyway, so the point is that when you're going through, where was I going?
The motions.
Oh yeah, you're
Ball.
going through the motions, right? Know what you want, and then apply that. But be very
And
cognizant.
it's also like know what you want. Easier said than done.
Yeah, easier said than done. But you want to go back through synthesizing and writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to structure your thinking around experiences, right? So if you leave a job, if you finish a book, if you start a new job, if you are learning a new subject, if
You're
you
just sitting in your basement reading a book.
yeah, if you so I'd say that if you want to process something and build first principles from it, you want to gather a lot of material together into one place and really structure your thinking around it.
Yeah.
That's what Sume did with Principles of Learning. So she and Isla and one of the other students at WEquil School, one of their students, Antigone Stark, they went through a lot of different material and tried to find the highest and best insights, the principles that govern learning.
That's the one thing that is like, I think really, really useful about first principles is you can condense it and see patterns across like a bunch of
Exactly.
different things, because it's like people, they'll write an article like 10 what rules or things that you're supposed to do to have good relationships. Like, you can't remember all 10 things and be applying them all at the same time. But if you're gathering all these first principles of like, here's the first principles of how I succeed in relationships. Here's the first principles in how I'm going to build my career. Here's the first principles in how I'm going to have a happy family environment. And here's the first principles for me to feel content, or like my experience with that. And it's like you take all of these things, you see the patterns, and you can condense it into things that are just like generally what you can keep in your mind and try to act upon, that is just like really simple, really basic, and you can execute on like all of those things at the same time because it's really simple. Like, for example, our universal principles of just kindness, freedom, service, right? You can understand those, you can act upon them, and it's not super complicated. You can't keep 15 ways to have a good life.
50 principles for cleaning your room.
Yay!
Yeah.
And it's like you can't think about all 50 things and also have them be useful to you. And so it's with first principles thinking, it's like you can take all those things and actually think about like what are the patterns, what are the generalized rules that are actually going to help me across all areas of my life, regardless of the specific situations. Obviously, there are always going to be exceptions, but like thinking just about like, well, what do I want to, what generally is going to be true and good for me to act upon. And that's really, really hard to do with precedent because there's so much.
It's just really hard to, it's really hard to interpret the meaning of experiences.
Yeah.
Because, like, let's say that you have an argument or a disagreement with, like, a friend or colleague. Well, what caused that? Well, that's really complicated.
Yeah.
Like, you also have to be able to get really good data. Right? It's very hard to get good data if one's kind of getting emotionally wrapped up in something, only seeing things from their perspective, unwilling to listen.
It's also very easy to kind of like isolate that situation or only look at the situations that are like most similar to that one. Whether it's like I got in an argument with this person, you're thinking about all your past arguments with that specific person, or you're thinking about all the past arguments that made you feel
Ah,
similar in that
exactly.
situation. So you
Yeah.
can get very biased perspective on even your own experiences, especially when you're kind of in an emotionally charged situation, because it's going to remind you or trigger certain things in your past experiences, and then you can get a very kind of biased outlook as to like what it actually means.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Yeah. How do you interpret it? That also, it helps to have a lot of data. So when I was working at PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst and Young, I really liked the way that they were doing 360 feedback. It was way better than what I was getting at Fannie Mae, where I had one boss and I would just do a project and then my boss would tell me how good I did. It was very much
Good
like public
job.
school, like teaching, and there was an upper limit to how good you could do. Like, there was a cap on how big bonuses could be. Like, generally, it wasn't as with working in government, it was probably it was even tougher to get valuable feedback there because people are just expected to just kind of be autonomously, providing service. But it's very hard um, to provide a lot of feedback because you're not even trying to make money, right? You're just trying to be helpful
Hmm.
to the country. So then it gets really complicated. Like, so, but at PwC and EY, you're constantly focused on driving value for the company, and and you're working on multiple projects. And in my case, I was managing multiple teams at the same time, right? So in order to do that, then one has to be very aware of, or one has the ability to listen to lots of feedback from lots of different places. So, like 4 different clients at a time, 4 different bosses at a time. Lots of either subordinates or peers that are providing feedback to you, right? It becomes very, very hard to ignore the patterns when that happens, if it's structured,
Hmm.
right? If you're getting feedback in a structured way, on a regular basis. This is the same kind of thing we want to build out for investors of WEquil Capital. We want to build out more of an automated process that gets them feedback in a way that's structured that they can look and evaluate over time that helps them understand first principles for their investing
Yeah.
because they have really good data. It's not based on, well, when I bought Tesla, it made me feel good, but then later it made me feel bad. And
Oh
then later
no.
it made me feel good again. I don't understand. It's just like, okay, so maybe it would be better to structure this.
Which means that on average, Tesla is meh.
Meh. Did you actually learn much? Like, how do you derive the first principles for helping you to invest better, right, in that system,
Mhm.
if you're basically just trying to conjure up examples of experiences that you had buying and selling securities? It's
It's
about
also
as
there's different industries and
mm,
there's like specific situations, and then it's just like
I think it's the
very
same. I think
complicated.
it's the same thing with folks that have a really hard time like finding somebody that they. I was giving the example earlier about like romantic relationships. Like you'll see people that just like are jumping around and like not necessarily really thinking through what they want. They're
Hmm.
just like going and are they like going back through and thinking, what went wrong? I mean, usually
Or
it's
are
like,
they think?
man, I can't believe that girl would do that to me, and then she came by and keep my car. Oh my goodness! It's just like, relax, relax, figure out what happened.
Yeah.
That's the way I talk when I'm mad.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, first principle thinking. It's
Yeah.
yeah, 45 minutes. We
Yeah.
haven't had a long one like that for a while.
Yeah.
First principles for good YouTube channels is you just got to have really, really long
Yeah. You gotta.
impromptu discussions.
Yeah. That are like don't have very professional thumbnails where you're just looking out in the
You're just
corner
like,
going. That's
that's the
that's the
key.
best way.
That's the
Hmm.
key. Plus,
A
that you
dinosaur
need that.
skull that's 3D printed.
Yeah, good light.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
That's pretty much all you need.
Yeah.
That's how, if people were wanting to know how we managed to get to 300 something.
385 subscribers. You know.
Oh, well, I thought
We
it was
have.
like 300. I didn't know.
No, you know, we've gotten like
Oh.
a few in the past week.
I think
Exponential growth.
it was funny because I was working with, I got to tell you this. So we work with a few different entrepreneurs that basically the whole business is their YouTube channel. YouTube is not a very good business.
Yeah, it's good for passive income if you're able to get to a certain amount of subscribers, but it's really hard if
you're
in a-
LeBron James or you're like, you know, some famous
you-
person already
yeah.
and you want to just like make some passive income.
Okay, that's
start a
easy 'cause
YouTube channel.
Yeah, because
and
you're
go.
already famous. But if
Yeah.
you're not already famous, which most of us are not,
Yeah,
then that's hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
And fame, it comes with dangers too. No, I'm just but like so one of the things that it's funny because it's like when you're working and you're supporting a YouTuber, like
There's also just so
They-
much content. It's really hard to find a niche. That's why every
Yeah,
single
that's true.
time, like you watch all these videos of like how to grow your YouTube channel, and then everybody says find a niche, but that is like that alone is incredibly hard.
easy, it's just do Minecraft videos.
That's not a niche.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, one of the things that I'll mention, and we hop off here, is that like I really like the way that we're working with YouTubers, but then finding ways to build Flutter apps that we can build around their channels, so that it becomes a way more personalized experience.
Yeah.
Like this is cool. So like so we're not a YouTube business. We're WEquil.app. That's our flagship.
This is our
this is-
YouTube
this
channel
is-
that
this
we
is
do
the-
for fun in the mornings.
Yeah, this is our coffee morning channel, but
Yeah.
But we do have a few other channels. You should check out
They're actually
the ones
on
below.
this channel. If you click on the
Oh,
channel and
nice.
scroll down, it has all of the YouTube channels that we do.
Yeah. So the main purpose of those is really to explain and provide guidance to members of our learning community about various programs, services, opportunities. So feel free to check those out. If you're not if you're not using the app or in our learning community, then you should join, check it out. But otherwise, yeah, maybe share what you guys are doing. Come in and if you really like what we're doing, if you find it interesting, if you're curious about deep learning, project-based learning, self-directed learning,
Or just learning in
applying
general.
first principle thinking to investing, and then we're working with a wide range of different entrepreneurs, building apps, doing various other collaborative engagements for youth entrepreneurship. It's great. So yeah, feel free to come on by and join our Discord, say hi, and don't forget to use the magic word.
Why not?
All
And
right.
subscribe!
All
Yay!
right. Yay! Subscribe. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Ooh, I can do it.
Okay.
I can do it.